are you?
I'm good. Welcome to Solana Crossroads. Just FYI, so we're here in Istanbul. I'm currently standing in front of an audience of, there's a couple of thousand people here today. We've got builders in the house. We've got other protocols on Solana. We're right at the end of the day. You're like, I know it's like really early for you, but we're right finishing our day now. So you're going to take us off. We're going to have some fun. It's going to be good. But thank you so much for thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to be talking about the latest things that are going on in your head and what's going on with Solana and all that sort of stuff. Maybe a good way to start is where are we at in terms of Solana in 2024? You know, there was some scaling stuff that we've been dealing with in the last few years, right? We've had a few outages, we can talk about Anza, we can talk about other things there as well. But in terms of your mind, like, what are you thinking of where Solana's at? Like, we're still mainnet beta as well, by the way. So for those out there, but totally, like, to hear from you, where are we at in 2024 in Solana?
So folks can stop calling it beta at any time. It's just my personal preference is that we do that after Firedancer ships, because the thing that I think is most important in these networks is verifiability. And when you have a single client, you have a single point of failure just because you have a single set of humans that have worked on one client. And if you look at even the original Byzantine fault tolerance paper, the folks talk about that you need multiple teams that are independent building the implementation. So you have this idea of kind of reducing the buzz factor, as we call it in engineering. You want different people to work on the same component. So the probability of a bug being in both of them is virtually zero. So that's kind of my view, and I think we're making really good progress, especially on stability. I kind of look at all of these events that cause Solana to struggle right now as a blessing, because my view is within 5 years, we're going to have $1 trillion worth of stable coins at least. And right now, we get to see the network through economic incentives, through meme coins, through inscriptions, through NFTs, stress test parts that we're blessed to stress test with meme coins and not with $1 trillion worth of stable coins. So right now we're lucky to find those bugs and fix them. And I think, as you've seen over the last 4 years, we, in a lot of ways, I think got lucky with the design that all the issues that have come up have basically been fixed within like a single sprint. And I think that speaks well for all the engineers that put their minds on building the right design and the right bones. And now we get to find any kind of implementation bugs and correct them.
So I guess a lot of this, these struggles with certainly, it's a good thing, right? Because we've had congestion on the chain, but congestion exists because a lot of people wants to use the product. Like, that's kind of a good problem to have, right? So maybe did it come with
that part is a blessing too. Yeah, it's better to fix scaling bugs than lack of PMF.
Absolutely, and I guess we would, if we're going to be talking about scaling, we would be remiss to not talk about Firedancer. So maybe for those in the audience as well, if you want to, we spoke about the multiple implementations, and I think Ethereum's the only one with multiple validation clients out there as well, but Solana Firedancer is the new validator client. But maybe tell us a little bit more about that, set the scene, sort of what are we looking at with Firedancer, how's it going in terms of sort of what you're seeing, and yeah, go from there.
Well, you can follow all their work in their open source repo on GitHub. And what's really cool about what they're doing is that they're basically taking the Solana protocol as is and demonstrating that, if you knew the end state and you had a bunch of really good engineers, you know how to build it right. The Anza engineers, unfortunately, had to build it and design it and get it to market at the same time. So there's technical debt there. But if you do it from scratch, you know the end state, and you can show that the same design scales with hardware without any changes to the protocol. And that's really, really important, because once you get to the stage where the only difference that you need to do is add cores. It's a very powerful system because every 2 years, there's twice as many cores for the same amount of dollars. TSMC, NVIDIA, all of these folks working on AI, they're all pushing this very, very large semiconductor industry forward. Not even just crypto, but everything in the world that depends on semiconductors pushes it forward. And that causes these very massive improvements in scale and performance. So in my experience working at Qualcomm, once you got the design to that point where all you need is hardware, you're done with the, not even just computer science problems, you're done with the computer engineering problems. It's kind of in maintenance mode. And that's ideally where we want to get to. And it's really awesome that FireDancer folks, if you've been following their GitHub and their demos and stuff, have clearly shown that every component can scale up. If you add cores, it goes up. And because they get to kind of show off their stuff, and they're a bunch of high frequency trading engineers, they're showing scale that even surprises me. Like, unlike a couple dozen cores, they're able to saturate 20 gigs of throughput. And that's awesome. And the way Solana is designed is that, we're scaling, by scaling TPS, we're scaling the entire chain because we've demonstrated that consensus, number of nodes, all these other dependencies that people think about, they're all really bottlenecks of bandwidth. You can lay that out in theory, on paper, and it makes sense. It's very painful to prove that in the implementation, and this is why Solana can have 10 times the number of nodes that most other proof-of-stake networks have. That takes just a lot of implementation work. And FireDancer now taking that design and showing that you can just scale bandwidth up with the number of cores means that you can use that bandwidth for applications, but you can also use it to massively decentralize the network. If we need 100,000 nodes, that's possible. So then the market will figure out what those parameters are. It can basically scale to whatever the global demands are.
Well, that's a good point. Do we need 100,000 nodes? Like, where's the inflection point of what we like? Is it 573,423? Like, why not 422? Like, well, like, what's yeah. Well, what do you think?
My job as an engineer is to unblock, and I think that let the world decide where that lands, right? If there is demand for that many nodes that are all verifying and participating in consensus, that's awesome. It means that decentralization is super important for global finance. There's so much demand for it that's what the network does. I think the bad outcome is if the demand is there and somehow the technology isn't there. This is what, I think as an open source kind of code base that it needs to solve, that it just needs to unblock the world. But it's up to the developers, up to the application builders, up to the businesses running on top of the network, providing validator services or, transaction flow services or whatever. Those are the folks that are, through competition, are actually going to decide what it looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess talking on this sort of decentralization aspect and so on, you recently spun out Anza from Labs, right? And like, what was the thinking behind that? Is that to unblock people? Is that to reduce friction? Is that to just, hey, there's another team out there with their own direction that can make decisions quicker? Or what was the thought process behind that?
I'm kind of blessed as somebody that hates management to be in an industry where this is also the fastest way to grow. So one is we couldn't stop engineers from creating their own company and going and doing their own thing because all the code is open source, all the IP is publicly owned, so anyone can go do this. And it's awesome to see that group of folks come together and go do it, and now do it as an external company. I think it's easy to say that all those things are possible on paper, and you can even show, hey, look, all the licenses are open source, but it's really hard to demonstrate it in live and show, no, really, it is a fully decentralized network. I can't tell Trent what to do or the ACs how to build a code base. I think from a long-term open source growth perspective, this is really, really important because it's a bad outcome if you have like Linus getting, like not also having influence over the design, but also having like managerial control over the engineers. I think you start losing the benefits of open source where folks feel free to like disagree and fight, and like really that like design grind is what creates better and better outcomes. It's when you have like competition of ideas is how we actually move forward.
I think that's a key thing that you just said there, like the competition of ideas. And I think one of the things which Solana has done and continues to do really well is the prevalence of hackathons, right? Certainly during the bear market, there's a ton of hackathons, right? We had the hacker houses going on. Like correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like there was a focus on developers first of like building stuff. And is that sort of what you see as the path forward of, hey, we just need to build a thing? Is it build it and they will come? Or is it like build it and build it in some way that maybe they build something sooner rather than later? Maybe there's hackathons, maybe there's other incentives, or what's your thought process around, I guess, this inspiring this competition? Like, how do you generate that on day one?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of luck for us with timing that we launched in the bottom of kind of the worst time in 2020, right when I think the world froze up because of the massive crash in both Bitcoin and the stock markets. So we didn't really have a choice to stop because we were a tiny company with limited runway. We had to go and launch. And that window kind of allowed us to establish like a group of devs that are very entrepreneurial. Folks that are really focused on building products and serving users. And when you have that group as your first customer, it's a blessing because all the engineers that are supporting them start kind of thinking in that loop. There's a customer that wants to do X. Somehow the core engine is not supporting that. How do we fix that? And once that kind of flywheel started, I think you saw that, the design and everything else that was built to respond to end user demands, like actual end users. And that attracted more developers and kind of got our flywheel going. So I think I would hope that everyone that is an entrepreneur thinks like that, but I don't know. And we're blessed that we got lucky with that initial set of really, really good developers like Armani, like Step, like Mango, like all these folks that are really focused on serving the end user and got that flywheel going. So that's really kind of, I think, has been going for the last 4 years, and it reflects in the hackathon. We see a very large set of folks that are very different, I think, from the initial Ethereum community, which is very research focused, to folks that I want to get PMF. I want to find a niche where I'm really making customers happy and creating a really good product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe this comes back to the developer focus. But what's, I guess, your core focus these days? I mean, Solana's been around for a number of years now. There's lots of people in positions that can make decisions that's not Anatoly. So what are the, how do you see growth happening? Like, what do you, how are you thinking? Is it a strategic perspective that you're sort of at the sidelines being like, yeah, look, I think this is a focus area that we need to look at, and maybe that's, alternate clients, or is it like, how are you setting the agenda? Is it just sort of, or is it just
every time I have an idea at this point, I talk to somebody and they're already working on it. There's somebody in some company in org that's building it already. So that's been really good. It's also been really good that there's been like really strong pushback on the engineering side. If I have an idea and it's wrong, there's enough smart people that are very engaged with how the network works that they push back. My favorite example of that was Ben from Margin Fi, who was really adamant that the problems and congestion, way before we even saw them on the network, like blow up in a really bad way, were all in the network stack. And it was really, really good to see that an external an app developer that's been using the network got that deep enough to understand and debug everything. There was this inflection point in the 90s with Linux where people that were using Linux eventually became the best developers in the Linux kernel. And that's when Linux really took off, is when you start seeing external companies master the kernel to the point where, hey, I can build Android, right? Like you wouldn't even think twice about using something else in 2003 to build Android if you're an entrepreneur. That's really, really cool. So we're getting there. I'm at that point, like probably mobile is my biggest focus.
Yeah.
I think there is, it's cool to go kind of do something from 0 to 1 again and see it grow. We like always, right? Like every startup, we almost failed last year. And somehow there was this kind of like weird bank shot with Bonk that really, I think, proved out that there is a path for digital content subsidizing hardware, external digital content built by developers subsidizing hardware.
I mean, that must have been a really sort of, was it an interesting realization? Because it was kind of like, okay, the phone, the initial thesis is cool. We're like, everyone uses a phone. There's billions of them in the world. They're all internet connected. We should probably do more crypto things on it. It's a thing. Let's do it. And then, okay, sales are great. And then all of a sudden, boom, like it completely blows up. And it's like, wow, actually, maybe this is what we should be focusing on. So it is, yeah, like what was...
It's a little bit of a different struggle. The sales are terrible. We wanted to sell like 20,000 units. On day one, we sold 2,000, and then it was like 50 a week. So it was a brutal struggle. And our thesis was that like crypto's trying to disrupt banks. Banks charge like 2%, or they charge basis points. Right? Like the way that banks measure fees is in basis points. Apple and Google charge 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
to them, basis points are a rounding error. So there's a massive difference in the kind of fees that centralized providers have in the digital space versus the rest of finance. So I thought that was a very disruptible kind of take. And the challenging part is that, like with credit cards, the consumer doesn't really feel that pain. It's the developer that does, right? A company that has a ton of revenue in Apple and gives 30% of that to Apple cannot hire as many engineers. They cannot produce as much content, right? They cannot make as many productivity apps. That really hurts like that small business. Apple gets to like rake in those dollars and invest them in better hardware, and that works. But there should be a different competitive path. And our thesis was that a lot of digital content has a very power law distribution of users. So a small percentage of users generates the vast majority of revenues. So could we incentivize developers to actually take some of their content, airdrop it to their power users on a platform that doesn't charge them any fees and start moving those folks over? So we'll see. We got like a small taste of that with Bonk. I would love to see like a traditional Web2 company to eventually kind of get it. Like, oh yeah, we can build a game and we can give a bunch of our, skins and NFTs and get a bunch of the players off of Apple. We'll see if that happens. That would be kind of the sign of, global crypto adoption in my mind.
Yeah, it seems like half the battle is against the App Store and the other half is like, okay, yeah, they're cool. There's a phone involved. And the phone involved is like the physical proof of life device, but you kind of need two things at the same time to have a product. Like if you just have an alternate app store, like probably not many people are going to use it, right? But if you sort of push that forward with the device, then that maybe changes the game. Like, is there a thinking maybe internally or what's going on in your mind with, is it about the app store? Is it about, oh, cool, this phone has a cool camera and it's how many megapixel? Like, is that important or not really?
I think we're at a point where you can build a competitive phone. It's really like at the mid-tier range. It's the hardware is very hard to differentiate. You can build a better phone than Samsung, but it'll take you longer and it'll be more expensive because they have the economies of the scale. It's the same thing with Apple. It's really, really hard to compete with Google on software because they have the economies of scale there. Luckily, you can reuse a bunch of their stuff, but like, still, like it's very, very hard to compete and differentiate there. So I think you really need, the App Store is the only thing that could really be a differentiator there. And what's weird and cool about crypto is that it's a shared user experience. You have content that creates communities. It's mixed of operating system and social network and finance. It's a really, really bizarre industry. And to me, that's an advantage. as long as it stays weird, it's very hard for Apple and Google to adopt it and subvert it. So the weirder it stays, and kind of it is an opportunity for us to kind of grow with it.
Yeah, and do you think, so another, people would call it a narrative, but it's actually a legitimate vertical of Solana is DePIN, right? So like decentralized physical infrastructure networks. I see that there's maybe a bit more focus in recent times, let's say the last year, of Solana with DePIN. We got Helium, we got some other cool things. Like, is that something which maybe changes the way that you go about actively developing something if we're trying to, build these physical networks, or just sort of slots into everything that already happens on a blockchain? It's a giant ledger with a bunch of blocks and people put some information in each one. Like, does that change anything from your perspective?
I think this kind of comes to, like, probably just, again, the entrepreneurial spirit of everyone participating in the network is like, once you have a cheap, giant public ledger, what can you do with it? The ledger itself is very boring. It's an accounting system, right? It's just a spreadsheet. Yeah. But like, if it's an open, transparent one, what properties does it have that like you can exploit to do something cool? And when you're at least, I think like I fell in love with Helium probably because of my background spending a career in telecom. The business kind of billing systems that tie a phone call that uses data and a connection to a tower to an actual like client payment are very, very ancient. These are like things that were built in the 80s and they're ripe for disruption. And because they're so old, like even today in the US, you have like roaming fraud. Like towers will lie that user A connected and actually paid for something. It's crazy to think about that you have like this like the most advanced communication network that we have, right? Built with like latest silicon that can get you 1 gigabit live FaceTime between a user in China driving at 100 miles an hour and one in the US. Don't drive that fast, but whatever, right? Like you can set up this link, mobile link that's 100, one gigabit at like 100 miles an hour, but there's no way that the telecoms can figure out who actually should be paying for it because the billing systems and databases are so old. This is bizarre state of the world that we live in. So I think it's in a weird way, like having this open, transparent ledger is a way to disrupt a lot of the kind of old infrastructure for finance that exists, not just for banking and payments, but even internal systems between like seemingly advanced technology companies. So Helium is awesome in that it can scale globally. You can have 5G cell providers anywhere in the world. All that stuff is easily tracked and traced. And it's a public ledger, so they benefit from the users that get to nerd out and become like cellular provider geeks and track all the stuff that's happening and making sure that the rewards are distributed in a fair and open way. And that I think is like a very critical piece that is often missing in big organizations that are closed, because you expect, there's some team that's supposed to be doing that, but in reality they're understaffed and like not on the bottom line, right, for anyone.
Yeah, on a side note, one of my favorite videos is the Anatoly meme video that starts with sharding sucks, and then you go on and say some stuff. But I guess one of the things that Solana is famous for is consensus at the speed of light, right? So is that still a thing that a lot of people might say, look, L2s should exist. You shouldn't have everything on one layer. You should have multiple layers doing different things, and why is the logic not separated? Like, is that still a focus for you and Solana going forward, do you think? That, look, we still want to make sure that consensus at the speed of light for everything on one layer is the way to go. I mean, what's your thoughts there? Has anything changed over the last year or so with all of these different announcements and 5,462 L2s?
Absolutely not. I think it's actually, don't fear the competitor with 10,000 L2s, fear the competitor with one L2. Yeah. This is kind of how I look at it. I think it's pretty obvious to developers what a pain it is to deal with fragmented state. And the underlying problem is that the L2s themselves don't really address the core kind of hard scaling problems. If you have 100 billion accounts, they can't all fit in a single L2. And if you have that many active users, you have to go and route all that information between all the L2s. It is in itself a bottleneck. You have to solve that problem. And the only way to do it that I know is, again, optimize with silicon, right? Like make the system as fast as possible using the hardware that we have. And that will improve by 2x every 2 years. It may be that today it's not fast enough, right, to support the world, but I can guarantee you in 20 years, it definitely will be. And probably within 5 years. The reality is that hardware moves pretty quickly these days. So that in my mind is kind of the core part here, is that L2s in themselves don't solve fundamental scaling problems to handle a very large concurrent set. And the developers don't really want to deal with the asynchronous nature of moving state between these systems. It's a very, very hard and gnarly problem. So this is an opportunity for a single giant kind of world computer that's synchronized at the speed of light. If I, like think of what does finance look like in a science fiction world 100 years from now, it's a giant hyper fast computer where everything moves at the speed of physics, right? It's not a whole bunch of network systems where things are slow and expensive and have to synchronize.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. I guess we're coming up on time here, but sort of one final comment. What are you most excited about in 2024, halfway through the year now? We've mentioned a whole bunch of different things, a lot of different stuff going on, but what are you excited for? What's gets you up in the morning?
Firedancer making a ton of progress, and like I have my guess is that like 50-50 odds will be done before breakpoint in terms of having a full client implementation running in mainnet. So we'll see, but I'm very bullish on the kind of progress they're making. You can already see that their full implementation of the runtime like handles 200,000 slots, so basically a full epoch at a time. So there's still like a few small kind of wrinkles there to fix to make sure it never disconnects from mainnet, but it's making a ton of awesome progress. It's getting there.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, Toly. I know it's very early there. We have a lot of builders in the audience and people doing cool stuff. I mean, just quickly, is there any final message that you have for peeps if they're interested in engaging, being part of Solana, doing anything? Where should they go? What should they do? Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, go to Solana.com, and if you're a dev, seriously, just go jump into the next hackathon. There's a couple every year. It's the best place to meet a team that is a team of entrepreneurs that want to build a product, get PMF, raise capital, and scale a company. It's been awesome to see like first-time entrepreneurs like succeed in that whole path.
Amazing. Well, everyone, if you could please, like, round of applause for Toly. Thank you. And we'll let you get on with the rest of your day, Toly. So peace out and GM.
Thank you, GM.